Human interaction can vary quite a bit, but likely the most important factor in human interaction, whether it's intrasexual, that is, between the same sex, or intersexual, between different sexes, is, for better or worse, appearance, or physical projection, physiology, however you want to put it. By this I mean things like the halo effect. The way one presents oneself has a lot to do with, frankly speaking, how good one looks. A man who's 6'3" and looks like a male model will look good regardless of what he's wearing, whether they're torn up jeans or a ripped up button down. By way of contrast, a man who's only 5'3" and doesn't look particularly good, well, there's nothing really that can save him. And so it's an unfortunate reality that we have to live with, that appearance seems to regulate and mediate everything. Halo effect, whether or not we perceive people to be good. But that can, to some degree, be mitigated by getting to know a person over time, which is to say, there are character qualities that perhaps cannot outshine appearance, but they're to be weighted along with everything else given sufficient time. Although the question, of course, then arises, would you even bother talking to the person in the first place? And I'm talking about this to discuss a particular phenomenon, and that is the phenomenon of women more broadly, but specifically women on Twitch, using their looks to coast by, all the while doing horrible things. Now, Twitch is just a good example, it could be anything, of this phenomenon, but there was a case recently of one girl whose name is Alinity, who's had a really bad track record of, say, throwing her cat behind her without any regard for the cat's safety. Now, presumably the cat landed on 4 feet. That's all well and good. Essentially feeding vodka down the cat's mouth or gullet. And you could see the cat did not enjoy that at all. And in general, treating people very, very poorly. The way she interacts with her subs. And to top it all off, she originally comes from Colombia. She married a Canadian man and divorced him, and said publicly on camera or on video that that was her intention all along, more or less. And now she has a permanent visa in Canada. This is overall a very, very unpleasant person. But she makes Twitch a fair bit of money, and she looks okay. She's not really my taste, but a lot of people think that she looks good. And she really is a perfect example of a woman who is coasting by on her appearance and doing quite well as a consequence. And it wouldn't be the only example. The entire world is shot through with people, both men and women, who coast by based solely on their appearance. There is a fundamental problem here, though, gentlemen, and that is the nature of human aging and decay. When you think about professional athletes, you might say their prime is somewhere between 18, maybe 30. Depends, obviously, quite a bit on the sport and can vary vastly. Cyclists can, for example, compete well into their mid-30s, as I understand it. Likewise, marathon runners. But that's broadly speaking a good range, 18 to 30 or 18 to early 30s, for male athletes at least. And at some point in time, their body will decay. They will be not as capable as they were in former times. And at that point in time, these male athletes typically have to retire. They have to make that decision. It's probably a difficult decision, but there's no way that Michael Jordan, in his current state, and I believe he's either in his late 50s or early 60s, could play nearly as well as he did when he was in his prime. It's simply a fact of, well, entropy, really, but specifically physiology. And so he retired a long time ago. He's doing quite well given merchandise and his legacy. That said, athletes who retire have to think about what they're going to be doing in the future after they retire from the sport that they dedicated so much time and effort to. And this is universal. And the same could be said of even, say, pro gamers. They typically don't compete at very competitive levels above the age of 30. The range really is something like 18 to 30, give or take. That's a sweet spot for all kinds of competition, not just typical sports, but also gaming, etc., etc. And it's no surprise and no coincidence that the same kind of applies to women with respect to the wall. Women have a peak probably much shorter, between 18 and 25, and a slow decay after that. With that said, many of them can continue until they're 30, assuming they take care of themselves. But the question I want to pose out loud here, and it's a bit of a rhetorical question, at the same time it's a question that can be answered in a variety of ways, is even in today's society, even given the trappings of things like social media, the overexposure certain people get, is it really possible, and on top of that permissible, to behave in absolutely obnoxious, hideous, and sometimes cruel and inhumane ways towards other people, towards animals like cats, etc., just because you look a certain way? Because looks, as we all know, as your body itself, they have an expiration date. At some point in time, we're all going to die. But on that way to oblivion, there is a pretty well-known path. We all age, we all get older. If the entirety of your existence and how you interact with people is predicated solely on your appearance, what are you going to do when you turn out to be a very unpleasant and nasty character overall? What are you going to do when that's no longer an option? It's an open question, yet a question I think that is pretty answerable by most people. The answer is, quite frankly, that no single human being can coast by based solely on physical properties. Eventually, these physical properties wither away. Of course, mental properties are intimately tied to physiology. I am not denying that. But here's an odd, novel question. Why don't people these days devote themselves to character? Now, there's a lot of cult of positivity type stuff online talking about character, but treating people decently, treating people fairly, not going out of your way to be an a-hole, etc., things like that. Is that actually a norm these days? Increasingly, my impression, especially with Generation Z and even people who deem themselves millennials, is that that's not the case. And so it's the case with many of these Twitch ladies, for example, Alinity, and there are a few others, who treat their audience and the people around them in absolutely atrocious ways and think, probably subconsciously, or don't think, to the extent that they do think about it, that they can get away with this in perpetuity. The problem here is that if you go your entire life, whether you're a man or a woman, not developing any character traits with regards to other people, being a decent person, that's basically what I mean, not many people are going to want to associate when you get older and you're old and wrinkly and nobody really cares about your appearance anymore because your appearance, quite frankly, isn't that satisfying and nobody wants to look at you anymore. It's something that I think a lot of people these days, especially women who are pursuing these types of jobs, such as on Twitch, but also social media more broadly, really don't think about much. They think this goes on forever. Now, I'm not somebody who's obsessed about the wall, but the wall is, in many respects, a real thing. And of course, there's another factor, there's social isolation. Social isolation is not something I would endorse. Even the most monk-like person who happens to be going his own way probably needs to interact with people sometimes, and sometimes it feels good. It feels good to me, for example, to interact with friends, even though I'm quite monkish in my habits. And sometimes I would prefer to interact with other people than just be by myself. That's perfectly normal. I think that's true of a large number of people, and that would be especially true of extroverts. Most people are extroverted. And in the case of some of these Twitch ladies, it goes without saying that they wouldn't be on Twitch if they were an extrovert. At least I suspect they wouldn't be. And so they think that their looks and their appearance are going to carry them miles onwards, when that's clearly not the case. At some point in time, the well will dry up. And if all you have after that is a twisted, withered soul within, I don't mean the soul literally, but figuratively, no one's going to want to interact with you. This is something that I think in the current culture is just obviously lacking. In a sweeping way, people don't care about basic human decency. Not going out of your way to treat people like an a-hole, not being inordinately cruel, not treating animals cruelly. I suppose they think it's funny. And because of the nature of our economy, Twitch rewards, as in this case, this type of behavior. But there's an important non-karmic boomerang here, hence the title of the video. I don't believe in karma in any cosmic sense. And of course we have that expression in English, what goes around comes around. I don't even necessarily believe that. But it simply can't be the case that people that for at least a decade, or maybe even more, coast by on their physical appearance and use that as their primary signal to the world, whilst at the same time not developing any other qualities or traits, will be able to do this in perpetuity. It's simply not possible. And I in my life have on occasion met these types of people. They're typically mostly women, but I have on occasion met a man who throughout their youth was not particularly kind, not particularly decent, treated people rather poorly. And now that they're in their 50s, in some case 60s, or even in their 40s, they're not being treated very well. And they have nobody to turn to because guess what? Nobody thinks that they're reliable people. And the one-time allure of their looks and their ability to charm and mesmerize the world vis-a-vis these looks, that's gone because their looks are gone. And what do you do then? I've long been an advocate of the idea that no man is an island, and for that matter, no woman either. Human beings are not islands. We do on some level need people, and sometimes it's just helpful to have people around. And the way we interact with each other in these days in the culture, the lying, the indecency, the cruelty, the general disgust we have for each other based on very superficial categories, not just the looks thing, but political categories, political views, religious views, take your pick, ethnicity. We really have gone down the tubes. And whilst many things are looking good, technology is making progress, obviously, medicine is moving ahead, etc., other things are looking more and more regressive. And the non-karmic boomerang is a given. You can't go through most of your youthful life being an obnoxious, unpleasant person and continue to do so when you're older and expect people to tolerate it. Because your only good that you're peddling in those cases is your appearance. That's very common with women, but sometimes also with men. And then what do you do? And I think if anything is lacking these days, it's a reminder that we all need to do our best to try to take care of our character and try to be decent people to each other, whatever our differences might be. But just treat your fellow mammals and your fellow human mammals in an okay way. And maybe, just maybe, there'll be people who want to associate with you in the future beyond your looks. And I think this is an important thing to state, especially these days. Things have just gone topsy-turvy. And with social media presence, appearance is pretty much everything. But how long does that last? How long can an athlete compete? How long can a woman compete? How long can a gigolo compete? All relevant questions. The most relevant question we need to ask ourselves is, what are we doing to improve our character? Not necessarily making money, not being virtuous in some sort of American dream sense, but just trying to be a decent person. Anyway, I thought it's an important thing to point out because it is rampant that we don't see basic human decency in the culture. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. As always, may the gods watch over you, and bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.